It is pretty amazing when you think about my grandfather's history, how he started very poor and sneaking onto a naval ship to get to the States after the war and then coming back and reestablishing himself. It's pretty remarkable.
I know very little about my grandfather's mother. I know she's buried in Sumai, at least my dad said he thought so, but he said my grandfather spoke very little bit about his mom.
Nana Lagermans had 3 sons. The oldest is Uncle Kin, I believe Lago is the last name, and then Governor Joseph Flores, and then my father, Jesus Flores Torres.
I have never met her. Esther Underwood, who happens to be one of our relatives, told me that she must be a very attractive woman. But definitely I know that she was very close to the Taitno and the Cabeza family. She went to the Philippines to learn embroidery, sewing, and anything domestic. The parents believed that she should know that. Okay, so she met Isidro Lago, a Spanish soldier, so they got married there. My father was born in Iloilo, Philippines, and after that, Isidro Lago died, something connected with deceased, so that's when she went in a ship to Guam and met the British doctor, who happened to be Joseph Flores' father.
His father was English, a doctor on a whaling boat.
The physician wanted to marry her, and he asked permission to marry her, but the Navy would not allow him because they wouldn't allow any native marrying their own people. Can you imagine that? I think the ship probably takes 30 days long to have that relationship, and then the military will not. They refuse to recognize the marriage, so they never got married. And then I don't know how many more months, but I know that in 4 years, 3 husbands, and all have children, all boys.
Although I never knew her, I understood that she was one beautiful lady and that she died early. She died at the age of 26.
2 uncles and my father were raised by the Gojo family. They were living adjacent to Atkins Kroll in the Guamanian before the war. And they're very connected to one another. They were reared together. All 3 brothers look different. One looks like the Torres family. My father looks like the Lago family in Spain.
Well, my grandfather was very fair skinned. He had multicolor eyes. He had kind of blue eyes with like a brown iris around him. And I know when he came back, and now we're talking about when my grandmother, like in the late 40s, early 50s, and he went to the townhouse. Townhouse with Ken Jones, who just started his entrepreneurial life in Guam. And Townhouse was the place to go. So I remember they were looking at something in the mirror, in the store window that they were going to buy, and the people were talking in Chamorro saying, just get that one, because it was dusty. Just get that one, they won't know anything. And instead of going to the warehouse and getting a clean one. And so he's surprised, and we turned around and started talking to him, and Chamorro says, no, we like the one that's clean in the back. So when my grandfather joined the Navy, he had to make the final determination, are you a Cromwell or are you a Flores? Well, he's a Flores. He never knew the Cromwell part.
He carried his mom's name, but his real name would probably be something Caucasian, And he looked Caucasian. He even had the habits of Caucasian, and Miskino. In certain ways, yeah. Otherwise, it's okay. It's not all bad.
There's a reason people don't know the private side of my grandfather, because he was a very private man. And he was probably foremost to just the basics, like his love of the church. He was very devoted to the Catholic Church. And his family. He had one son, my father. He and my grandmother were married 60 plus years. They were very, very loyal to each other. And he was a very honest, ethical, hardworking man who always thought, what could he do back that would be good for those around him?
I knew him only when I went to the States. he was the one that asked my father to send me to the States right after the war second. And he said, bring her over and you don't have to worry about anything. I'll pay for everything. And my father agreed, but the only one condition, because my father is strict, he's Spanish, remember. I said, only one condition, that you are fully responsible of her. You know, I said, remember, she's only 17 and she's flippant, you know, she's flirtatious. My uncle really took that responsibility at heart. And, it was terrible. I couldn't even date anyone. For 3.5 years, I was with him in San Francisco, 1.5 years in Guam. I went on a hospital ship. I was dizzy all the way through. Oh, one of the most beautiful things though, just because it took us almost 30 days in the ship. So 2 days I was feeling better, so I was getting up. And I tell you, the mountain is filled with snow. That's why it's really November, it's a cold climate. And then when I first went to the private school, they asked you to write something. And my essay, which got an A mark, my first glimpse of USA. It was a beautiful, my uncle loved that. And he said to me, so you do speak English in Guam? Uncle surprised you. There's something warm about it. He took that and framed it. I don't know where he put it, but there's something about him that there's a lot of love, but he doesn't want to show it.
So he, even as a, when I were talking back in the 1940s, he made sure my father had a college education. He was so proud of my father when my father went into the Navy.
I know he was a strict father. They both were very strict with my father. And when needed, both of them, my father and grandfather, would correct us, but they were never very strict with us, as I'm sure they were with my father. I guess that's the way grandparents are.
Because of the kind of people they are, I never felt out of place. All of a sudden, I accepted them as really my uncle, and that was the first time I saw him. When you first look at him, you think, oh God, this man, you're not going to have a good time with this man. You know, I mean, it's too damn serious. But you know what surprised me? A touch of Guam. What happened is that every night by 10 o'clock, he would come up to we call it the penthouse because it does look like a penthouse, the 3rd floor, and would ask me, bring me a glass of milk. He always does that, a glass of milk. And he said, are you very busy? Do you have much homework? And I said, why? He said, come down and play the piano. He loved to listen. That's why I said he may be very serious, but there is still music with him. And, you know, that's how you find the character of the individual. But the music he likes is, let me call you sweetheart, when I grow too old to dream. They're really way back in the 20s. But I happen to know it. So it was through him many times that I learned the old music just for him. I would buy, you know, Sherman and Clay, I would buy booklets of old-fashioned music just for him, because he does love to hear it in the evening.
He showed me at an early age how enjoyable it could be, and that it was part of your daily life. My father and mother were both played the piano, and so I grew up in a house too where there was a lot of music going on. At least in the early days, when they were younger, they played a lot. I started playing when I was 3 or 4, but I didn't get lessons until I was about 12. And it was my grandparents that finally said that offered to pay for the lessons. Then my grandfather bought me a grand piano eventually. We lived down on the peninsula, the San Francisco Peninsula, down at Redwood City and then later in Atherton, Menlo Park area. And they'd come down on the weekends, and he was always happy. He was always full of love. He really was always full of love, delighted to see us, overjoyed to be with his grandchildren. We'd go upstairs where my grandparents had their apartment. My grandmother was a meticulous housekeeper. And we go into this very clean apartment and my grandfather used to love to make scrambled eggs. However, he always used to make them in one of those cast iron frying pans. So he put the butter in. This is a really strong memory of my grandfather, putting the butter in the cast iron pan, scrambling the eggs, and the eggs would always come out with that faint flavor of iron. He used to talk to me about Guam and would I like to go to Guam, would I like to see it. Then he'd had big shelves on his bookshelves alongside his books, and he would ask us to listen to the shells so we could hear the ocean back on Guam. He went back to Guam in '48, I think it was, and then started trying to really establish himself here, but there was still a while where he would come back and forth quite a bit. And it was hard for all of us that they would have to go back and forth.
On Christmas, it's not like today where you just make a phone call. This isn't even like when you had RCA where you had to get in line. But this is going back even further, like into the 1950s, early 1960s, where you had to almost make an appointment to make an overseas call. So it would always be, I don't know, 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, where my parents would be yelling upstairs to the kids, come on downstairs, Grandpa and Grandma are on the phone. So it was our annual phone call with Grandpa and Grandma on Christmas. And it was always the same questions. In fact, we joke about it sometimes too, like, what time is it over there? And then when they come to visit the States, my grandmother used to say, how come whenever we visit the States, people ask us when we're leaving? Because it's that same thing we always ask, how long are you going to be here? Where Stanford University is now, or Stanford Shopping Center, there used to be a place called Marquard's. So whenever Grandpa was coming to the States, we loved it because we would get into his big old Pontiac Chieftain and drive to Marquard's. And it was every time the same thing. French fries, chocolate shake, and a cheeseburger. It was a ritual.
When I was around 10 years old, just before we left for boarding school, I used to remember that my uncle would go and get me and or my sister and take us, and we would spend the weekend with him over in Tamuning. The place is now, Mariana's Finance is there. And he used to have a hamburger stand, hamburger and hot dog, and up to this day, I will never forget the smell of hamburgers and hot dogs coming from there. It was really a beautiful time for me. And also right across the street was the old Johnston Theater, and it was through him that I saw my very first 3D. Although it was a war movie, God knows, I mean, I see these cannons heading towards me and I'd be going like this. And it was such an experience. And I go and see 3D movies now, but it was never the same as back then. Maybe because it was my first 3D movie. It was just great. He was one lovable person. I love both of them to death.
My grandfather was very, very much devoted to his family and spending time with his family. It seemed it was his greatest joy in life. Same with my grandmother.
I found him to be a very intelligent person. You can talk any subject, and very entertaining. But all that, there's always that facade, there's always that whole continent of being serious, and that's the way he is. You look at any picture now of my uncle, and he looks at you, very handsome, but he looks at you like saying to you, no monkey business, you know. That's very true. At first I thought I was an introvert, but he's not. He's just very conservative, very much to himself. And but I've never heard him saying a joke, something funny, you know, like most people I know. Like Uncle Jimmy, he loved to tell jokes.
And my father has a knack of, you know, wherever he meets people, he would always make them laugh and just be very, very pleasant. I guess my father made up for his seriousness. And maybe that's why the two of them got along so well.
He's always serious. But there's something about his aura, his air, that you enjoy being with him.
I remember one time in the apartment, we were over in San Rafael, and I don't know, he and Auntie came to visit us, and it was a summertime, and I don't know what happened. We were taking pictures, and he decides to take this, I don't know if you remember the rain bonnet, the clear rain bonnet. He takes that and opens it up and goes like this, and he says, "Now take my picture."
At that time, my Uncle Jimmy was still alive with his and Tita, my cousins, and Auntie Mariquita, and they lived up the hill on Route 4, off of Route 4. And we'd go up there almost every Sunday for a big family dinner, or they'd come down to my grandfather's. That was always so great. It was wonderful. We'd go down to Tumon, and it was nothing but dirt roads and sand roads down here and palm trees, and you'd drive through a forest of coconuts and come down here to the beach, and we'd barbecue on the beach. He and my aunties and uncles would sit around at night after we kids would get tired. We'd just sit there and listen, and to hear the soft Chamorro voices. And then they'd laugh, gentle laughter, nothing ever raucous. But no, I felt very much at home when I first came to Guam, and I always have. I guess I still look for the comfort of the voices of my grandfather and his brothers and sisters speaking Chamorro at night.
He would take care of my father, and my father would, you know, always be with him. And it was a nice relationship. It was a very nice relationship. I know that Uncle is proud of his brother, and I know my father was proud of his brother. Uncle would ask Daddy if it could go and man the downstairs in the Pacific Press while he was upstairs in the office. And Daddy likes to work with his hands. And so when Uncle asked him, he went ahead and he started working at Pacific Press. Uncle never called him Jimmy. My uncle called him Tsu. My aunt calls him Brother Jesus. And for some people, not all, not a lot, just a few people, he's Jimmy. But I always enjoyed my aunt calling him, "Hi there, Brother Jesus. What are you doing?"
She was Mexican. Her parents came up in the 1890s from Mexico, settled in San Francisco. She grew up with a big family. I think there were like 8 or 9 or 11 of them. You know, good Mexican Catholics. You know, one thing that my father did really well was make Mexican food. And he got that from my grandmother because she made killer enchiladas and chile relleno. My father was their only child. And she treated my mom like her daughter, and she was a strong woman, a really strong woman. And I was the boy, I was her favorite. This is like now 1947, 1948. The war is over in Guam. They'd started a Flores Brothers. It was like a Lujan's little shop, a little general store right on the corner of Aspinall and Hessler, where BankPacific again is now. So they kept saying, "No, come back to Guam, come back to Guam." So he came back and looked at Guam in 1947, went back to the States. My father now is out of the Navy, back working with my grandfather in San Francisco. And he takes my grandmother, my grandfather takes my grandmother, who's born and reared in San Francisco, has only known San Francisco her whole life. Says, "We're moving to Guam." And so they moved to Guam, and they moved into the Quonset hut, and they started that. He joined his brothers in the little Flores Brothers store. And I asked my grandmother, "How could you do that? How could you move from a modern city, San Francisco, a very progressive city, San Francisco, to live in a Quonset hut in Guam, in Tamuning?" And because she said when you turn the shower on, you didn't know what was going to come out, and then when something did come out, you had to get out of the way of the mud until the water started coming through. And she said something very Spanish. She says, "Where your husband goes, you go."
She's a very funny lady in her own way. She can crack a joke, and I laugh a lot.
When Auntie bought a nice outfit, a beautiful outfit, and she has taste, she really has, he would say, "Hey, that's a beautiful dress. Where did you get that?" Auntie would say, it's your money. You know, things like that. She likes to make jokes. In fact, one of the cutest jokes she ever told me, I was only, I think I was 18 already, 1 year already. 3 married couples are celebrating their anniversaries. And the band is a beautiful band. And she mentioned a fantastic hotel in Market Street in San Francisco. All 3 of them. So when the first anniversary came, they played the music night and day. That's for the first anniversary. Then on the 25th anniversary is Once in a While. And then on the 50th anniversary, it's Memories. But she laughed because I said, what do you mean? She said to me, I thought you liked music. So finally, when she said that, I thought you liked music, then it dawned on me, you know. Let me tell you that Uncle already have quite a bit of money before he came to Guam. And he told his wife, and me including, because we were eating when he was saying that these are the things I would like to do. And he said, I hope you support me, Angela. He said, Joe, just do all you want, just give me the money to buy a hat. She loves hat.
There was a Mexican store that used to supply tortillas and other Mexican products. And when my grandparents were home for a visit, my grandmother would go to the store to get tortillas and things so she could make enchiladas or whatever, a Mexican meal. And she was always extremely careful that the food was properly prepared. And she'd ask to see their fingernails before they would bring her food.
She would sit us down, and when by us I mean my sisters and myself. It would seem like it was daily, probably not quite, but she'd read etiquette, the book of etiquette to us from Emily Post, you know, to make sure that we grew up with manners. And so there were no elbows on the table, but that was kind of the way, you know, my mom would had it too. But yeah, the book of etiquette by Emily Post, I know that one chapter and verse. Everybody should have one as a paperweight.
Oh, he loved to take his wife to a movie. He does. He showed a little caring, you know. And Auntie Angela never felt she was neglected. Her whole conception in her mind was that as long as my husband is in the premises, I wouldn't mind. When he was a politician too, he would often receive criticism. One of his very good cousins from Minarahan said something like they should string him up by a tree. And my grandmother was so upset. She was so upset that somebody close to them would say that, or just anybody would say that, because again, the fierce loyalty. And my grandfather would say, Ange, it's okay. Don't even think about it. Don't bother to even think about that. That's why you have 2 ears, in this one and out the other. She was hardworking and is, again, that thing, just stand by your man, and she stood by my grandfather. She was a fiercely loyal woman. You couldn't talk bad about any Flores. She wanted to go to Italy and see the Pope. She wanted it so bad since we were in San Francisco. And then Uncle said, when we get to Guam, when we started the business, when the business is already stabilized, he said, well, he's going to do this first and do this, but I promise I'll take you next year. It continued like that. And she said, take Lagermans or take anybody you want and go and see the Pope. Because, honey, and he's so involved in the Republican political thing, everything. Oh, there's always a reason for his involvement, you know, and he's so dedicated. My auntie never went to see the Pope because she wanted, and they had the money, oh my goodness, she wanted her husband, not me or anybody, to go with her. My father talks about, again, Sequoia Hospital, taking her there because she wasn't feeling well for a checkup and seeing the x-ray of the tar in her lungs. My father, as a lifelong smoker, he said he stopped that day, as did my grandmother, but she still had the effects.
I remember meeting as Mrs. Flores grew older and was no longer able to get out of the house very often. Going to visit her periodically in the afternoon, maybe after school, something like that, because she liked to have people come and see her.
I moved out in '73, and my grandmother had emphysema. She'd been diagnosed earlier, and it progressively got worse. So by 75, 76, 77, she wasn't able to travel as much anymore. She was attached to the oxygen bottles so much more. And back then, you're talking about the big canisters. Wasn't nearly mobile. And my grandfather was her caretaker.
He took care of her. And I mean, he took care of her. We didn't have what they call caretakers, and he could afford all the caretakers, but no, he was there with his wife.
Even when my grandfather had his last stroke, I was in the States at the time, and she was in bed, and she heard him go down, and she told me later, I heard him go down, and making noises, couldn't verbalize, just making noises. And she was able to get out of bed, energize herself, and call for the ambulance, call for the help, and of course relatives and friends immediately would come over. And then the call to me, and I'm on the airplane that night back home. But it was hard for her. That's when I saw how hard it is for people to age. But I will say they both did it with such dignity. Even when they were in pain, and I know my grandfather had such pain in his final months, dignity meant so much, and self-respect meant so much. When she was in the hospital several times over at GMH, the old GMH, that he'd spend so much time there. He would ask me to spend the night with her, of course I would. And during those times too, sometimes I would stay with him at nighttime. And I remember one night he got up in the middle of the night and left. What had happened is he was sleeping with the windows open. The screen had blown off onto the bed. And he said, that's a message from Ange, from my wife. So he jumped in the car and ran to the hospital. Fortunately, it wasn't a message, but that's my grandfather's belief, and that was her devotion.
I don't know how true this is. When you're old and married, never divorced, nothing, that when one dies, one just followed the other. That's what happened. The missing. But my auntie's very close to my uncle, and she really trusted him. It's a kind of trust that you and I do not have. Very rare. And I think that's why Uncle is very key to his business work, because he has nothing to be threatened off or anything, nothing. Everything is pleasant, everything is fine.
It was September 1981, and my grandfather had gone to, he was having issues with his health. He'd had a couple of strokes, he'd had 3 heart attacks, and he always came back from all of them. He had his first heart attack when he was 55. He was in San Francisco at the time. He explained to me that he'd eaten enchiladas. That was the last time I think he ate enchiladas. He thought it was indigestion, or acid reflux as we would know today. But no, you had a heart attack, sir. So that was his first one. But then in the early 1981, I say like in March or April, he was having issues, and they discovered that he had cancer. And he was spending a lot of time in and out of the hospital at that point. And then we were going to be medevaced to San Francisco for better care. And his last night, he knew he wasn't coming back. I mean, I could pretend, oh, Grandpa, you're going to get better. He knew he wasn't coming back. And so the last night he said, son, I want to spend my night at home. And so came back and spent the night at home up in Hagåtña Heights. And the next day we drove up to Anderson Air Force Base, and we were being put on an airplane to the States. We were going to, I think it was Travis up there in Northern California. And so I was expecting like this big, beautiful flying hospital. No, there was no noise insulation. You're on a transport ship and in the sky, and you're on cots basically. It was very hard on my grandfather, and it was very hard on my grandmother for that flight. And so then we stopped in Honolulu for a couple hours, and it was better for them. And at that point I'm taking care of my grandfather, and some very personal things for him. And then we get to Travis, and then we get into an ambulance who drives to Sequoia Hospital in Redwood City, which was about a 2 or 3 hour drive. And That was in September, early September 1981. And I stayed for 3 or 4 days. My father is my grandfather. Get back to work. Dad, I haven't been off island for 3 years. Get back. Okay. So I spent only about 3 or 4 days there. And that's the last time I saw my grandfather. And he passed away on December 18, 1981. And went back, we had services there. And then brought him back. Geez, I don't normally do this. Then we brought him back and had a state funeral. And then my grandmother passed away 6 weeks later. And my dad brought her back for that one. And I remember my grandmother, they were so devoted to each other. And we're at the funeral home in Redwood City, and my grandfather was laid out, and of course the family's seen him first. And my grandmother's in a wheelchair at that point because she had emphysema and she had a hard time walking. And she just starts talking to my grandfather in Spanish. And I go to, of course afterwards, we go to my dad. What'd she say? She goes, why did you leave me? Why am I here all alone? So, which explains why after being together for 60 years, they're only 6 weeks apart in their passing, respective passings.
We knew he was a very religious man because Ruth would say he just wrote, you know, a $1,000 check for the cathedral or something like that.
One of the fascinating things, though, that I saw him is he gets his Social Security, and one day Tony didn't have anyone to run to the church to give Archbishop Flores his contribution. So I went to Tony, says, I'm ready to go. What am I supposed to do now? He says, take this, and he took the check out and he put it into an envelope and addressed it to Archbishop Flores. And what I saw was Social Security check in the amount of $1,000, and apparently he gives that to the church every month, which was kind of him. And I said, Tony, why don't you suggest to Governor Flores to cash this and take care of all of us during lunchtime, you know, a month's lunch, whatnot? And Tony would always say, get out of here, Ruth.
So when that news came that he was going to be made a knight of the church, it did not surprise me. I said very apropos. He should be recognized.
But it was so funny. I said, Grandpa, who are you guys protecting? You're out like in your late 70s, early 80s. So I know, son.
And we were included in his guest list. Ruth, Tina, and I. And it was held at the old Catholic Activities Hall, which is now has long disappeared. But I remember going. We went to the ceremony, and then we went to the Catholic Activities Hall for a reception. And Ruth and I were standing there and congratulated him. And I'm so glad you came, girls. So make sure you stay and eat. And, you know, just singling us out of the crowd. I thought that was so, it really touched me that this man could be so human to us.
I would only say I wish I would have known him better, because he was, you know, he's governor here. He was a newspaper publisher, ran shipping, had an airline. I mean, he's the kind of person you'd like to know more about and get to know better, because he was a really wise man, I think. He wouldn't have been able to accomplish what he did if he wasn't.
He always mentioned what he wanted to accomplish. He did. He accomplished everything. When he came to Guam, he bought the newspaper, which is the Daily News. Then he opened a bank. He even opened an insurance company, Pacific Insurance Company.
One thing I'll say about my grandfather, he told me that, you know, they didn't have the assets to pay for the damages when people came in with their claims, so he took it out of his own pocket because he felt it was his responsibility. It was his name. If he said, I'm going to provide you insurance, even if it has to come out of my pocket and the company went broke, I'll take it out of my pocket to give it to you.
And then he opened up a restaurant, done up Spanish style with wrought iron, beautiful tile floors, you know, the adobe colored bricks and stuff, and oh, it was beautiful. And guess where I had one of the best meals of my life? He invited us and he said, you come to my restaurant, I want you girls to try it out and see how, tell me what you think about it. That to me is one of the most pleasant memories of my life, because, you know, it was a first-class restaurant and he ordered for us, and And of course, the first thing he ordered for us was salad. Salad, I always thought of salad as potato salad. Well, it was not potato salad. It was a tossed green salad, and I'm looking at all these different vegetables, and I'm saying, oh, how am I going to eat this? But I loved it, and thanks to Mr. Flores, I got to taste my first salad.
He drove a little Hillman Sunbeam sports car. He also had a car dealership that sold Hillmans.
You know, everybody thought of my grandfather as being so strict, so upright, which he was, but he also liked to cruise around in his little sports car.
My earliest memories of my grandfather and grandmother are when they lived in San Francisco in the Bayview district. He had a printing shop there. Eventually, after my father returned home from the war, he went to work with my grandfather as well.
His idea, because he knew there were a lot of neighborhoods back then. It wasn't just a big city. There was the Bayview district, there was the Mission district. So he created newspapers with advertisers that he just distributed around the neighborhoods.
He became very successful because he stick to it. And he did it with, I don't know, I always felt that he's a very self-sufficient person, independent, very independent. And he shows it, even at home. Like he would be sitting there and all of a sudden he thought of something down at the press shop. He would take a pencil and paper and note it down.
And I remember the story my grandmother told me one time during the Great Depression, because when you start a business, it's a small business and you're working very hard, how he would come upstairs and sometimes didn't shave for days, and he would just lie on the couch and stare at the ceiling. And because he was just wondering how he was going to get through this. But at that time, he adopted probably what he knew already, to be very frugal and just to work hard, to work harder than the guy next to him. And he made it through, obviously, and came back to Guam. And one of his first businesses was to take over the old Guam Daily News, now the Pacific Daily News. I think he wanted the Guam Daily News to be, as I went back and, I've looked at some old articles. Of course, it's a very local paper. And I think he wanted to have it concentrate on our local community, but he wanted it just to be a local rag, which goes right in with what he did before in San Francisco by having neighborhood newspapers. So in essence, Guam was the neighborhood for this one.
I worked for Joseph Flores, 9 years, but not directly, but he owned the institutions like that I worked for. He owned the Daily News. We have, of course, a news editorial office. That's where I was. That's where Alex Flores was.
And it was during the summer. My dad saw that I was just loafing around. No intentions of going to college, no intentions of working. And of course, being a single parent, he was so concerned that we'd make the most of our lives. So he called me and he said, I'm going to make an arrangement for you to meet with Joseph Flores at that time. I said, who? He says, Joseph Flores. I want you to start at least at the Daily News. I don't care what you do, but I'm going to talk to him. He's a good friend of mine. When I went down to see him, there was Mr. Pedro Abaco. Are you Ruth Leon Guerrero? Yes, I am. He says, well, you're going to start downstairs. I'm going to put you with Felino Amistad. And you do exactly what Mr. Amistad said. You only have 2 weeks to prove that you can work.
I was a 19-year-old sophomore in college, so after my second year, I decided to come home for the summer. I think I was home maybe all of 4 days, and I get this message to please call Alex Flores, who was the managing editor of the Guam Daily News at the time, to please come down and see him. He just says, how long will you be here? I said, for the summer. And he says, would you like to work? I said, yes, I would like that, but I have to ask my parents first. I didn't make any decisions on my own then. So I asked my dad, can I work at the Daily News? And he said, yes. And I started doing odds and ends, and one day, up this steep staircase came this very good-looking, very debonair man, bespectacled, and he starts looking around and he spots me. And I guess he realizes that's a new face. So he comes over to my desk and said, "And who are you?" I said, "I'm Elaine Cruz. I'm from Hagåtña Heights." So he says, "Hagåtña Heights, I like that village. Maybe one day I'll build a home up there." So I told him, "Oh, that would be nice." I didn't know who he was, but then after he introduced himself, I said, "Oh my goodness, I just met the publisher and owner of this firm." Just 2 years later, since I joined the paper, the big buzz in the newsroom is that our boss has been appointed governor of this island. And I said, "Governor? Oh my goodness, maybe he's going to close the shop, right, and move on and be governor." And we didn't know what the details about it, but we knew that yes, he was going to be governor.
During the preparation of the governor's inauguration, he met with most of the employees, and one of them was me. And he said that he's going to be a governor, he's going to be inaugurated, and in his absence, he would have his son come to Guam and manage it and supervise us, and to please give him as much dedication and help as he did receive from us. So Mr. Eddie Flores came to be the son, and when he walked into the room for our first meeting, we were just looking at him as tall as he is, handsome as he is, young as he is. So this is going to be our boss. So there's no more of that, watch it because Mr. Flores is coming. No, he does it quietly. He's a very polite person, very diplomatic when he gives you instruction. And he does assure you that he's there to help you.
We were living in San Jose, and we weren't really happy with the big city and the smog and everything. And we took the San Francisco the Chronicle, and Joe just was going through the want ads and happened to say wanted in Guam, one editor. And so he came home and he said, "How would you like to live on an island?" And I thought, well, you know, we were actually from Wisconsin. We moved different places where he's very adventuresome. So we thought, well, that sounds pretty nice. So he wrote to them. I think he wrote to them, and they wrote back and they wanted him to come. The school was still on, so he came in December, and we came and we followed after school was out. But in the meantime, after Joe went to Guam, Joe and Angie Flores, Governor Flores, were in the States, so they came over to meet us in San Jose and tell us about what Joe is doing, and just to get to know us and stuff like that. So they were so nice. I mean, they were just so nice. I just thought this darling couple, because they're kind of small compared to Holly's, right? And just really, really, really nice. And we were all excited about it. So we came a few months later.
Joe Murphy told me this story, and he said when he was working upstairs, and I remember when I first went there, his office was right at the top of the stairs on the left, was Joe's office, and then the newsroom was out there with all the clankety-clank type machines that they used at that time, very slow things that punched out tape that they then ran through something else and made the linotypes work. But I remember him telling me this story, and I had tears running down my face. I was laughing so hard. That he said the temperature in the building got in excess of 100 degrees.
There was a girl doing the layout with laying out the pages up there, and it was so hot, and she fainted. So Joe took her home, and then he went to see Governor Flores, and he said, "Governor," he said, "we've got to do something." He said, "So-and-so just fainted," and he said, "It's just so hot." And Governor Flores said, "Joe, you're right. We've got to hire stronger girls."
That story just sticks in the back of my head because I just laughed. I said, "He really said that?" He said, "Yeah, he really said that." And I went, "You got to be kidding." He said, "No, he was serious."
He had his stringent rules. You leave for lunch on time, you come back from lunch on time. And I remember Ruth and I were running up the stairs because we were late, maybe 20 minutes.
And of course we were coming in from the press room. And with all the noise in the press room, we didn't realize that Mr. Flores was right behind us, tailing right behind us. And we were both eating ice cream.
And who comes walking in the door? Mr. Flores. He looks at us and says, what time does lunch end? 1 o'clock, sir. Do you know what time it is? Yes, sir, 1:25. And he turns to Mr. Abaco, who was his bookkeeper, and said to him in front of Ruth and me, deduct them.
And I turned around and I looked at Elaine and I dumped my ice cream. I was just so mad I wanted to quit.
And Ruth and I looked at one another and we said, well, what can we do? There goes half hour for our pay, right? But such sternness was always tempered by his gentlemanliness, his voice. After the chastising, if any is needed, I mean, he always came back with a smile. Okay, girls, we'll do better next time, won't we? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He was a good publisher because he really didn't interfere. I think he, as far as I know, because I was only there when Alex was there, he left the newspaper alone, knowing that the people running it know their business now and they're local. See?
I think the Alex Flores and Tony Palomo and Elaine Jones, they were very independent. He's not the type that would interfere. He would suggest perhaps for an editorial, but not interfering as to what was going to be written.
Governor Flores did not tell Joe what to write or direct him in any way politically. So that was good because I don't think Joe would have enjoyed working for him at all if he had done that. No.
He was never one to seek publicity. I mean, but he had the source to do it. He had the Daily News. But honestly, although I didn't read as much then as I do now, I didn't see him too many times in the media. When I saw him, it was on a one-on-one kind of thing, gathered with friends and associates. But he didn't seek publicity. I think that's humility.
I feel that whatever introduction to journalism I had, it was because of Alex Flores asking me to work. But then on top of all that, the kindness of the publisher to let me stay on and to allow Alex as managing editor to keep pushing me forward, till one day he said to me, we're going to start a Sunday paper and we're going to call it the Territorial Sun. Alex and I have talked it over, and would you like to be editor of that paper? I'll try. If I can do it, I will have to give it up. So okay. So all of a sudden, I found myself an editor, a managing editor of this Territorial Sun. And I did it for several years. I can't remember how long it was in publication, but that's when, like I said, the typhoon hit and everything just came to an abrupt end, and that's when I left the paper.
I don't know if he had to pay anything for the Guam Daily News, or if the Navy was just getting rid of assets. I'm not quite sure. I know what he sold it for, and I know he would not want me to tell you, but because again, he was a very private man, but he was so proud when he said, son, hold this check. I said, I bet you've never held a check like that before. I said, Grandpa. And it was a nice chunk of change, especially back then. And he was so proud, but he was sorry that he had to get rid of the newspaper. Not that he had to get rid of it, but it was one of his first companies that he'd started in Guam, and he was giving it away. And not for free, but he was getting rid of it. And so he had an emotional attachment to it.
He was an appointee of President Eisenhower upon the recommendation of Governor Lau. It's my understanding that he recommended Governor Flores because he was a successful businessman at that time, and there were not very many people in that category at that time.
When he was asked to be governor, he said, no, I'm a businessman. And they said, well, if you don't do it, there's nobody else we're going to ask from Guam. We're going to get somebody else, Texas or from other governors have been coming from the States. He said, okay, I'll do it.
I remember the actual ceremony of his inauguration and how proud he was. Got a beautiful white suit for the occasion, a sharkskin suit, white shoes. Very much a carryover of the colonial days, right? My grandmother very proper in her hat and gloves and purse. It was a thrill to know that my grandfather was in such a position.
And when my grandfather inauguration day, of course, there's so many cops around, and I found out later that night that because there was death threats against him.
There was some kind of a movement in here on Guam to try to block his nomination. First of all, again, you were talking of, this is a long time ago, a brownie being nominated and appointed. There were people of different skin color here on Guam who kind of resented that. And they tried to block his nomination. That didn't succeed. President nominated it, it was confirmed by the Senate.
But I thought it was just kind of cool. Oh, a death threat against Grandpa. But it didn't faze my grandfather. Government House was fun because it was big, and there was a great man, Gonzalo Reyes, who was my grandfather's, I guess, chauffeur, bodyguard, friend, and again, a very loyal man, a very devout man. Always has been a friend of mine because of my grandfather, not because of me. And even 5, 6 years ago, when he'd be growing banana or papaya, whatever, I'd come to my office and there was a bag outside the door to my office because he'd harvested and gave it to me and would always ask about my family.
My grandfather was, I think he was proud of the fact that he was a friend of the military, that he could call them his personal friends, his personal acquaintances.
He was very proud Chamorro, but he was very proud American too. He loved the American flag. He was very proud that he served in the United States Navy. My father was on the USS New Mexico during the liberation of Guam in 1944. That was my father's first trip to Guam, and my grandfather was very proud of it.
The business of politics, the day-to-day, I don't think he particularly enjoyed. My grandmother hated it, absolutely hated it. Just the dirty deals that go on, the things that people do to each other in their quest for power.
The governor needed my husband's assistance. In fact, he calls my husband Doc. You know, when you're a private business person, you really do not know how the government operates. So he found in my husband a big help. That's how they became close. They're similar personality-wise. They don't speak loud. They don't speak a lot of hot air.
Governor Flores was concerned with all these alleged crimes and corruptions going on in the police department, and a lot of illegal, either gambling or what have you, is going on, and he wanted to try to stop it. So he let the word out to the chief of police that he wants to start having some kind of a raid, some kind of do all these things. But unfortunately, that every time the police department raided, they're all gone. And Governor Flores says, there's got to be something wrong here. Why you can't hit the people in action when they're there? And we get all these reports. So finally he says, well, I'll tell you what. He says, from now on, if I will not tell you when to get a raid, but they'll assemble at the government house a bunch of police officers, and they were told to report, say, 6 o'clock that night. Nobody knows what was going on, at least the police department didn't know, but only Governor Flores and Doc Sanchez, and of course they have their own source of information apparently. And that's the time when he says, we go and hit this place, we go to hit this place. And to that he was able to get some successful raids. And there was a lot of leakage in the police department. They were actually, when an area was identified to be raided that night, somebody is already within the department telling them that they're going to come in to raid that night. So that stopped, and he was able to put some fear on a lot of gambling raids.
He never
I never heard him say anything bad about, oh, the Popular Party, they did pass this legislation and they did this and they were overspending. And if you look back on it during his administration, he never, whatever bills he vetoed, they never overrode it. And if they were bills that needed to be strengthened or changed or altered, which he would sign, he told them that. If you change this, I'll sign it. And when he turned in his resignation when the new president took office, because he was asked that question in the confirmation, would you turn in your resignation if a Democrat became president? And he said, yes, absolutely. Out of respect, that's your responsibility. That floored the senator. Most of them would say, why resign? You're appointed by us. No. Okay. He not only was good in the newspaper, but good in politics, but he also was good in business. He ran the kind of government I like, which is don't overspend. Don't put yourself in a deficit or that you don't have any money. Why are you spending money you don't have? Why borrow money when you can run a government more efficiently?
He was very much concerned with the way travel money was being spent. And at that time, the travel funds were allocated out of the Department of Finance. In those days, you ask for a travel authorization in advance for per diem to travel. So the legislature submitted a lot of requests to travel. Well, a great bunch of them never travel. Let me put it that way. And it was a large, huge sum of money. It's probably over $1 million, quite a lot of money, $1 million. And Governor Flores says, I want you folks to find out what happened to this money and ask the legislature to account for it. The legislature felt, why shouldn't we do that? I'm very independent. Well, Governor Flores threatened. He said, if you guys don't account for all that, I'll return the money, I'm going to put you all in jail. And it used it in the headline, put in jail. And boy, that really scared a lot of them. And so a lot of them came in and returned the money. But that action in itself led the legislature to change the law for them to take over the travel money. For all the accounting, all the finances, everything is done now through the legislature. But I mean, that was what precipitated, because Governor Flores insisted that if you leave the island and if you come back, you must account for every day you travel and, account for the money, the travel money.
The Republican Party was the brainchild of Governor Joseph Flores, Governor Carlos Camacho, Lieutenant Governor Kurt Moylan, Judge Vicente Reyes, and businessman Frank D. Perez, a former congressman of that, pre-Organic Act congressman. And also he was a member of the 8th Guam legislature, the territorial party. I continue to this day to be in awe at the reason, the philosophy that they put together. And it wasn't so much although it was part of it, to form a party that eventually would affiliate itself with the U.S. Republican Party. They wanted to give people the alternative. And I think that the gentlemen who formed it were very, very, very concerned about the aspect of putting together an economy that would be identified as a Guam economy rather than an economy that's not there. I mean, what did we have in Guam then? Nothing. It was the military and the governor of Guam. That's the industry. And I don't claim that it's the Republican Party who did it, but they were a part of it. They went to putting together a party that would espouse economic development.
He wanted not just beat up on the Popular Party, Democrat. He just wanted competition, which is very acceptable.
After the Organic Act was amended to allow the people of Guam to vote for the governorship, the first governor, of course, was a Republican, elected governor. But he continued to be, if not in the forefront, in the background, mentoring and continuing to hold the hands of the young ones who were coming, like me, and Tommy Tanaka, and Antonio Pinco, and a few others. So
we had to start from the very beginning to form the Republican Party. And I can remember saying that we have to go out to the villages and we have to talk to the people, because once you mention Republican Party, people say, what? What are you talking about? We're either territorial or Republican. I mean, we're popular. So in order to get into some of the to some of the homes to allow us a chance to talk what the benefits are for having a Republican Party on Guam, we brought Hawaiian Punch. And that looked like funny like heck. If you knock on the door and say, hey, hi, buenas, Governor Joseph Flores and Kurt Moylan. The door closed on us. They wouldn't talk to us. So we decided the best thing to do is bring them something so we have something to drink. And when they drank a little bit, then we talked. And that was the beginning.
And he said to me, you will become a Republican, won't you? Yes, sir, because my parents are territorial party members. All right, then it's natural that you become a Republican. Yes, sir, I will be a Republican. A card-carrying Republican? Yes, sir. Yes. So I guess we were among the first Republicans on Guam, because he went in and invited us to become members, and he said, we need new members, we need young blood, so I hope you will join. Yes, Governor. Yes. So I became a Republican. I told my mom and dad, we're Republicans now. Mr. Flores is organizing the Republican Party, and all of us and our families will become Republicans. My dad had no idea what Republican is, but he said, oh, okay, right, we're Republicans.
Thanks to him, we have the Republican Party today.
I think it wasn't so much that we here could relate to Washington, but that those in Washington could relate to us. Because if someone is in Washington and say, oh, what party's in it? He's a territorialist. What's that? But if you say, oh, he's a Republican or he's a Democrat, well, somebody on the one side of the aisle in Congress is going to, oh, I'm in that party. I kind of know what that guy's talking about. So I believe that's one of the reasons he wanted to step up and help in the progress and the growth of Guam. My grandfather opened up Guam Savings and Loan, now BankPacific, and Marianas Finance Corporation, both on July 7th. There's a reason there were two different corporations, because of banking laws back then. And he put together a group. They were, you know, the business people back then. It was, you know, Tum Pedro Ada, Tum Pedro Martinez, Jake Calvo, the Guerrero, the Camachos, Nasha Butler.
The group consisted of the real good people here on Guam, solid citizens, heavyweights.
So my grandfather had a friend in San Francisco, Elwood Hanson, who had Bayview Savings and Loan Association. And so he went to Elwood and said, Elwood, how do I start a savings and loan? He told him, and so my grandfather had his same group of friends. And like I said earlier, in 1954, July 7th, he started a Guam Savings and Loan Association, now BankPacific.
He called me one afternoon to come over to talk to him, so naturally I can't refuse. So I went there. He said, honey, why don't you work for me? Why do you have to work for somebody else? And I said, I love revenue and taxation. And he said, accounting? But I think you should work for your own relatives. So I did. I gave a 2 weeks notice and I went over and I became an assistant manager to Paul. Then lo and behold, in a matter of 1 year, Paul is out and I became manager. So I held it for that many years.
When I'm at work, it's Mr. Flores. When I'm outside of work, it's Uncle Joe or Philip, because Philip is actually my nephew. Yeah, so when I retired, I said, okay, now Philip, I'm out of Marianas Finance, you're now my nephew. Now you're going to say Ñora. And Uncle always, that's another habit of my uncle. He'll always come up and say Ñora, and he'd pinch my nose. Ñora.
He never treated me like a niece at all. I call him Mr. Flores. That he didn't tell me. I took it upon my intelligence enough to know that. He's very strict with me, believe it or not. I would go to a meeting, monthly meeting, and he questioned me. The others just kept quiet, all the board members, and they're quite leaders themselves. And he would question me left and right. And sometimes after the meeting, you know, I said, Uncle, I think you're trying to trip me or something. And he said, what do you mean? I said, you're trying to find fault. And he said, look, you're my niece, so I have to be extra strict with you. I always tell him, my goodness, he's been strict anyway, nothing new.
So when I came to Guam, 1973, and I'd grown up in California where everybody's coming to California at that time. And so I said, I'm going to go to Guam, work for my grandfather. I'm going to stick it out at least 3 years, no more than 5. And of course, my grandfather didn't see it that way. He says, either you're here or you're not here. But then I just started working with him, first for him, and then with him. And then he says, okay, I'm going to retire. I'm going to have you take over. So we get my dad on the phone. This is at the bank. And I'm on one extension, my grandfather was on the other. My dad answers. My grandfather goes, son, talking to my dad, son, I'm going to retire. My dad goes, again? Because he'd retired a couple times, but he just kept working. So I think my grandfather always wished that I was going to come out as the only son of the only son and take over. But again, I'll get back to the point where when I came, he wasn't going to give it to me. He was going to make sure I could do it and teach me how to do it. A couple times he said to me, we would talk about business, and he'd say to me, you know, I wish I was doing business against you. Because what I said, and again, I'm 23, 24, 25, I know everything. I should be running the world because I know everything. And he just kicked me in the head and said, you know, really, you're kind of stupid. And gave me the lesson. But he was so good because I could say, okay, I'll do what you're saying, just explain it to me. And he'd explain it to me.
He would call me sometimes into his office, and when he's angry, he will call me Lagrimas. When I'm in good standing with him, he'll call me Amma. Most people call me Amma, but he always calls me Amma, almost like a Japanese accent.
He would say, Lagrimas, you have to do this, something like that, because I am stubborn too. You know, I mean, although you paid me, let me tell you, you can't ride on my back. So I was a little more like him, more of the floor. Cabezas people are like that. Flores, you don't just go over and step on her back and jump on it. And no, boy, to me it's 50-50. You hurt me, I turn back and hurt you. So, and Uncle understand that, but like I say, in business he's very disciplined. What he said, and he has the habit of put like this and put his hand like this and start talking to you. You listen to him, and then finally he convinces you that he's right, especially when it's mortgages. He's very good at that.
Throughout the time I worked at Guam Savings, he called me in one time and talked to me, and he says, you know, you are an instigator. I said, Uncle, why are you saying that? He says, you know, you started this break thing. Because Sylvia Roberto, Artero Roberto, was showing me the ropes for Guam Savings, and then towards the mid-morning I said, hey, let's go take a break. So I'd go into the break room and we'd have coffee and pan de leche with butter. Oh my God, those are the fun times. So he called me an instigator, but I went ahead and continued the breaks. It was fun.
Uncle always checked, believe it or not. I think sometimes even if at home he thought of something, he would call me around 8. And he said, did you remember this you placed on, something like you placed on my desk? What was that? Because one thing about him, he was already having a problem with his health, and the doctor told him he has to take a nap in the afternoon. He has to. So he usually leaves. So I must have placed something there, and I couldn't remember it. And he said, you know, I paid you to remember. And I laughed. And he said to me, what's funny? I said, honey, and something I call him honey because he confuses me. Honey, you paid me to work, yes, 8 hours, but not including other 8 hours in the evening. And he said, I'll see you tomorrow. And he hung the phone.
I remember one time he told me, son, I could have made a lot more money than I've made, but I have to look at myself every morning in the mirror. His ethical standards were so high.
He was kind to those that are in need, but I've never seen the rough of him, that he mistreats people and whatnot. He was always teaching us why these people are not making it good, better for themselves. And that's why he was always teaching me to go back to school.
He had the forethought of business. He had his business called Guam Business Investment, and he helped a lot of people build up their business through his own personal Guam Business Investment, which is his own personal money.
He taught me a lot, you know, social graces, of course intellectually developing me as a newspaper woman. But I've heard him get angry with people. I've heard him berate people, but never in a mean way. Never. Just correct them and let them know that is not right. This is how I want things done, which is great, because we always towed the line after that.
I would see the Flores, like at Christmas parties and, you know, things like that, but not really often. He was someone I knew I could always call if I needed to talk to somebody.
Interestingly enough, he made me a tough woman. He made me to know what I'm doing, and if I'm right, to stay on that right course. And if I'm wrong, just admit that you're wrong. Don't deny it, and don't hide behind the truth.
He was a gentle man. He was a quiet man. But when he says something, you really need to listen.
The time I spent with my grandfather, I don't know if he was so much was shaping my character, or more he was refining it, or more focusing it.
But he was probably a pretty hard taskmaster, I would think, you know. But that's not surprising. I mean, most people who are successful are pretty hard taskmasters.
You want to be the starting fullback for the Packers and not have to go to practice? I mean, no, you don't complain. If you love the game, you play the game. It's not, no one said it was going to be easy. But I think because my grandfather put me to the mill back then, I can cope with it. And I always know tomorrow morning it's more important to wake up with your health than it is to wake up with a dollar. And if you wake up with your health and you know you're going to do that, and you wake up clear-minded, then with what you're confronted, you can more easily take care of it.
He told me, he said, I want to be proud of you. So don't take it, because one time I really cried. And you know, for me to cry, you got to kill yourself first before I cry. And one time he really made me cry, and finally that's when he called me and sat me down and he said, remember, you're my niece. I don't want you. I'm not trying to make you like me. I said, yes, you do. You're trying to make me like you. And I could never be like you, Uncle. He said, no, but I'm strict with you because I want the people to know, especially my board members, that I hired you not because you're my blood. I hired you because you have the mind to do it. And, well, he pacified me, but still, gee, that was bad. I don't even remember what it was.
I never doubted my grandfather was insensitive to me. I never doubted my grandfather's love. Not just for me, for my dad, my mom, my sisters, my grandmother. No, my grandfather was full of love, and I never doubted that.
He seemed like a gentle soul too, which was kind of nice, which you don't always find when people do that many things.
I only thought he wanted me to be better, because he had a standard of excellence. And excellence is different for different people. Golf, you know, if I go out there and I shoot an 82, for me that's excellent. Tiger Woods goes out there and shoots an 82, it's the worst game he's ever had in his life. So my grandfather was in the sense that he wanted everybody around him to strive for excellence, which means that you have to try, that you're focused, that you're giving it all. And no matter how smart you are, if I was, you know, a genius and I could do anything, if I wasn't giving it my all, out the door. That's what he wanted you to do, is give it your all. You know, I had 9 years under my grandfather daily. And it was like going to the office every day and being hit by a bullwhip, because he was so strict and so hard and such a mentor. I didn't think I'd do this, but he worked so hard for everything he had, and he wasn't just gonna, okay, I'm the only grandson. My father was an only child, so he was the only Flores. I am the only son, so I am the only Flores. That's nice, but that's not what mattered. He could always sell things and give people their distribution, but that's not what he wanted. He wanted to see his legacy of what he had built, and he wanted to make sure I could do it. And making sure I could do it was seeing if I had the spirit and I won't say intelligence, but the mental ability to do it. And then he wanted to teach me how to do it.
My first concept of savings came from my mother, Josefina Perez Barcenas. We weren't a family of financial means, not a lot of it. And anytime we asked for anything materialistic, my mother's caveat would always be, if you want something, you work hard and you save for it. So other than the piggy banks in our houses, we didn't know really how to save until a representative, a handsome one, he actually kind of looked like a movie star, came to St. Anthony. I must have been in 5th or 6th grade. And Phil Flores from Guam Savings and Loan explained how we can open a savings account with our parents' signature. And my mom was very happy to hear that we could co-sign on a savings account, and I did. That was 5th or 6th grade, and we kept it, and just what little money from birthdays and grandma, or from not really chores, I didn't do a lot of chores that we got paid for, we just had to do them. But what little money I had in my savings account, I didn't touch till I was a senior in high school. And with those couple of thousands of dollars, which was a lot to me, especially in 1985, it funded my senior high school trip, which was to Saipan, and then also a trip to the Philippines, a 2-week excursion. I got to meet my friends who moved out there, and did a juxtapose with, we were on Rojas Boulevard in Silahis, which was the hotel to be at in the 80s. And then we also got to live in the province of Olongapo for a week. And so that's what my savings afforded me at the end of my high school. Thank you, Guam Savings and Loan. Thank you, Mom.
I would always, not always, but I would see him sometimes taking the cash pouch and taking it to the bank himself. And normally, I mean, when you're that big businessman, you get people to do it, you know. Get your accounting clerk or somebody to do it, but he was doing it himself. And I imagine that he was doing it himself. He goes to the bank after he had counted all the pennies and the nickels and the dimes and put it all together and said, okay, this is my deposit for the day, and he'll go to the bank by himself. That impressed me because I thought that if you're going to be a successful businessman, you got to know what you're doing.
So in my life, I had tough men, and though I became tough, they always have the diplomacy to relate to people without showing, you know, rigid personalities and whatnot.
And when he opened up his brand new Guam Savings across the post office, they had an unveiling of a bust that was commissioned. He invited us again. He said, make sure you come. I want you girls to be there. I don't remember Ruth being there, but I remember going, you know, to honor this man who was always so kind to me. And he was standing there. There's the bust on a pedestal, all wrapped, draped in something. And somebody spoke a few words, and then they unveiled it. And I remember him taking a very close look at this image, okay? This engraven image of him, and he looks, glasses, everything, and it really was a very striking likeness of the man. I liked it, and then he smiled. So I guess he was pleased, he liked it, and I said, oh, I'm glad I am witness to this. And I said, Mr. Flores, it's beautiful, and it will be here for posterity. He said, well, unless we get another typhoon. So I said, he hasn't lost his sense of humor.
It was an assignment that he was retiring, and I think it was his birthday. And, you know, go interview him and do a story on his retirement and his life. The thing that stands out in my memory about that article and about that interview was when he talked about how much fun it was when he was a kid, and after the typhoons, there would be mangoes all over the ground. And he would go and just have a ball picking up all the mangoes and eating the mangoes. Out of all his accomplishments, all of the things that we had talked about, all of the time he spent in the Navy, the time he, you know, started the newspaper, both in the States, this penny give out paper, coming back to Guam, starting Guam Daily News, you know, starting all of these businesses. The thing that animated him, the thing that made him smile and relax and just be an ordinary person was picking up mangoes after the typhoon. It's like, wow, wow.
He was very proud of his plants. I think we've all got a bit of the farmer in us. My father used to do the same. Phil does when he can, and that's my business, is growing and doing plant installations for businesses. So yeah, we're all farmers. He liked to grow his peppers and his papaya, and he had his lemon tree and calamansi.
I walked away knowing that he was a very nice man, very dignified, very gentlemanly, you know, and didn't treat me like I was some, you know, stupid old, you know, what do you want to know? You know, why are you bothering me? No, it was a very pleasant experience. And then sadly, not long after that, he died, and I also covered his state funeral. And that was a little heart-wrenching because, you know, it's like, I just talked to the man not too long ago. The last time, you know, the first and the last time I ever spoke to the man was in that interview, and now, you know, he's passed on.
When I checked my yearbook, you know, it says, what would you like to be? And guess what I said? Journalist. I didn't even know what journalism was. I just heard the word, I think, and I said, oh, I'll be a journalist. And I ended up doing exactly what that yearbook said. But all because of the generosity of Governor Flores and, of course, Alex Flores, who just called me to come work.
You had a great leader. I mean, he came back from San Francisco with all that he could have earned and could have stayed there. But he didn't, and he encouraged his grandson to come and work for him. And Phil Flores has done a wonderful, wonderful job. Great friend. Same as the way his grandfather acted.
If you ask my daughter, she's in Miami going to med school. When people ask her where she's from, first she has the Flores, so that they think you know, it's Miami, or before that she was in D.C. They think, okay, so you're from, especially Miami, they think you're from Central America or South America. You know, I'm from Guam. You're from Guam? And it was fun because in her graduating class at Georgetown, she was the only person from Guam. In her med school, when she was going through interviews, they said, you'll be our first person in med school from Guam. And she thought that was pretty cool. And then I always went to her and said, honey, you know, you're an Asian Pacific Islander. You may have blonde hair and green eyes, but you're an Asian Pacific Islander. And when you're applying to school, make sure that you put that because there's, you know, there's preferences. And she goes, Dad, I'm not going to do that. Says, that's not the way you reared me. And says, you taught me to succeed on my own. And I thought, wow, that's really cool. I said to myself that she believes that she understands that, because that's exactly how I was taught by my grandfather, and it's exactly how my father was taught by my grandfather. You know what? And as we're talking, whoosh, boom, it just hit me how much he loved me. And I loved him too.
Phil says the same, has that same phrase as my grandfather. What was it? Something about if they're not with you, cut them out. He was very much either you're with me or against me sort of mentality. You can help. If you're going to help, that's fine. If you can't be loyal, never mind. Loyalty was a big thing.
My grandfather and I, we were in Rotary together. I'm still in Rotary. He got me into Rotary. And we used to meet down here at the Daiichi. Lina'la Fiesta every Thursday. And so often we drive by here and he goes, son, when I was governor, I made that a public park. And he must have said it to me a half a dozen times. So then when Senator Ted Nelson, my primo Ted, he was asked me what I would like to be named after my grandfather, remembering my grandfather, I thought, well, my grandfather loved the outdoors, he loved his garden, he loved his yard, and he loved the fact that EPAL became a beach while he was governor, a public park. And so I asked my primo Ted, can you make it be EPAL Park? So EPAL Park then became Governor Joseph Flores Park, which many people still call it EPAL Beach Park. And so whenever I see that in one of the newspapers or the television stations or the radio stations, I take that picture over there. I have a picture of the sign that says Governor Joseph Memorial Park, Joseph Flores Memorial Park. I say, great article, but you know, it's not EPAL Park, it's Governor Joseph Flores Memorial Park. And I think if he knew the park was named after him, he'd be really happy. I know there's other people who say, oh, you should name something else after him, but if he was alive, he'd be out here at the park.
Mowing it.
He might be mowing it too. No, he might have me mow it, and he'd be in the barbecue with my grandmother.
Did Phil tell you that he was my grandmother's favorite?
Oh, yes, he did.
And I was my grandfather's favorite.
In the States, I had a hard time trying to explain. You know, they call me La Grimas. And it sounds funny. In the first place, we are coming from an island which they don't know, and then they start calling you like La Grimas. And in my diploma, or any certificate that I received, even for being voted the most promising piano player, let me tell you that I changed my name to Alma. At first it was Alma, but the principal made a mistake and put Alma, not Alma. I love Alma, A-M-A. So if you're checking whether I graduated or whether I got, you'll never find it with Lagrimas. Even in college, Hills Business College, it's Alma. Because they murdered the word, Lagrimas.
It was after the Navy clearance was lifted, in the late 60s, that the airlines began to fly to Japan. So, it was a great event when the Pan American came in once a week. We all went down to the airport to have juice and crackers. Everybody, whether we were meeting anybody or not, that was the activity when the plane came in.
The first time that I actually got to go to Guam to visit them was when Phil and I traveled together, my brother Phil. We traveled with my grandparents together, and then we stopped on Wake Island, and I think that's where I first saw cockroaches, and they were so huge, and my grandmother went, she was so panicked at seeing this cockroach. It was so huge, and she started screaming and throwing shoes at it, and she eventually got it. But I think her fright at seeing that cockroach has instilled my disgust, although it's probably part of human nature to be disgusted by cockroaches. But that was my first introduction to a cockroach, a tropical cockroach. And then when we got back to Guam, she was always on the warpath against cockroaches.